Hello, I'm joined here today with the radiant Rachel Oates and the awesome Alex O'Connor, otherwise known as Cosmic Skeptic, or more accurately, we're joining you because these are your seats. Today we are basically collaborating to converse over 3 controversial topics. The first being abortion, which you can find on Rachel's channel, the second being nihilism, which you can find on Alex's channel, and the third being veganism, as given away by the title of this video. Now, to kick this conversation off, I'm going to present 2 quotes from Peter Singer, and then I'm going to break down the key words of the conversation because there's quite a few in flux. So the first is, we are quite literally gambling with the future of our planet for the sake of hamburgers. And the second is, could you look an animal in the eyes and say to it, my appetite is more important than your suffering? Now, as far as definitions go, there seems to be several in flux, and for the purpose of this video, these are what I'm going to use, and presumably you two will be happy to use them as well. A vegan is someone who does not, in so much as they can, eat or use animal products. A vegetarian is someone who does not eat meat, poultry or fish, so basically a vegan who also consumes milk, eggs and honey. A pescatarian is someone who does not eat meat or poultry, so basically a vegetarian who also consumes fish and seafood. A poultarian is someone who doesn't eat meat, so basically a pescatarian who also consumes poultry, so chicken. And an omnivore is someone who eats all types of edible sources, though often doesn't eat leafy greens. So, to get this ball rolling...
I'd say here we've got an omnivore, a herbivore and a carnivore.
Thing is that, would I fit herbivore?
Well, actually, that might be a good place to start, is to just kind of spell out what do you eat?
Well, this is it. I was going to ask you both.
You're a vegetarian, right?
I am, yeah, and I'm going to get in trouble for not being a vegan in this video. So, my first question to you both is, what is your diet, and how do you justify that diet? Let's start with the hard questions.
So I do eat quite a lot of veg, but I also eat a lot of cheese. I don't really consume much dairy as dairy, but I do consume it in other products. So for example, like milk chocolate, I love my chocolate, so there's milk in that. Biscuits and cakes have like eggs and milk and stuff. And when it comes to meat, I only really eat chicken and pig, and then it's maybe like 2-3 times a week max, but it's still there.
I see, so you say your diet is omnivore?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I do kind of struggle a lot with diet because I've had issues with food in the past, and now I'm a very fussy eater. So to be honest, finding anything for me to eat is a bit of a challenge. So
it's nice that you find the chicken and the pork or whatever it might be.
I do actually struggle with getting enough protein in my diet because like I'll eat vegetables and stuff fine, but then the other sources of like protein, like nuts or beans or whatever, I don't like them. I can't eat them. No. So for me, kind of enjoyment of food comes first, because
so there seemed to be like 2 angles there. One was enjoyment of food, and the second
and also
was
nutrition.
A bit of nutrition, because you have a preference for those types of protein or sources of certain nutrients that you need, right?
I do take supplements. Like I have to take like vitamin D supplements. I have to take vitamin B supplements as well, and other things. But there's only so far you can get. Like iron, I don't have enough iron in my diet either, so I'm like slightly anemic. So I have to take supplements for that. But there's kind of only so far I can take that before I have to say, well, if I'm not getting enough stuff, I have to change what I'm eating to some extent.
Okay.
But I still have to take enjoyment into it, otherwise I just don't eat. It's a weird psychological barrier I have.
Because food is an enjoyable thing, right?
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah.
And if you don't enjoy the food you're eating, then it does change that dynamic. It becomes something just about nutrition. So there's actually several arguments that you kind of presented there, which we can go into, and we will. But first off, what's your diet?
Well, you asked 2 questions. It was, what do I eat and how do I justify
Exactly, so it leads into it.
The thing is, those kind of betray a bit of an incongruency in the way that I live. I feel like I'm currently living somewhat of a contradiction in this sense. I mean, one of the most popular things, it's probably the same for you too, but people are saying all the time, either they want me to talk about veganism, or they're asking, are you a vegan? And I'm not, as you'll both know. We just went out for a nice meal and I had some chicken, and it tasted fantastic. But I struggle to justify it. The weird thing is though, so it's very difficult to live philosophically inconsistently. Like, it's very difficult. If you're really convinced of something, it's very, very difficult to live as though you're not.
You suffer from like cognitive dissonance,
yes,
right?
But it's like, if you are not living out a philosophy, then that implies that you're not fully convinced by that philosophy.
Yeah.
Even on just a psychological level.
I disagree, because I think part of being human is that you have these ideas and you have these morals and you have these philosophies and whatever, and then you try and live kind of to the best of that. Like, you don't necessarily have to achieve this perfection. You just do the best that you can.
But that's the thing, I'm not even necessarily doing that. I don't cut down on meat, I don't do anything of that sort, while still recognizing that I don't have any sound philosophical defenses for eating it.
See, that's kind of like where I'm a little bit different, because I do kind of like take the non-meat option when I can.
Right.
Something that you touched upon there is that we have different values, and people have a different distribution of where they place their value in certain things. So, you know, you use the word philosophy, whereas I might use the word value as a value of well-being, and that's why I don't want to hurt humans, and it necessarily extends to animals. I don't eat meat. I do pay people essentially to torture cows so that I can have milk and cheese. I'm fully aware of that. To me, that meets my current value standard, where that value is granted where it needs to be for me to feel a little bit more comfortable, whereas it would be a violation of my value to a point where I would not be able to live with myself if it was higher. That's going to change with education, it's going to change with age and experience. It's an interesting point to put it on the values, but if you say you value something, that you have a philosophy, and you do nothing to stop that at all, so there is not even, hey, I won't eat halal meat, or I will try not to get factory farm meat that's processed in the smallest corners of Europe where there are no laws. I think you've got a good point. There's a real cognitive dissonance going on there.
It's like, I think to myself, when I was younger, I enjoyed going to church. When I stopped believing in God, I stopped going to church. That was it, you know. It was like, there was no question about living consistently.
No.
But with this, there is some kind of difference, you know. It's not even the case that, I mean, when I really think about it, when I'm eating meat, I do think to myself, like, should I really be doing this? I probably shouldn't, but not to the level that I'm horrified by my actions. And so part of me thinks that there's something in my mind that's telling me that it's actually fine, and I'm interested in finding out what it is in my psychology that's telling me, no, it's okay what you're doing, don't worry about it, and seeing if that's rational or not, because I just can't see a way to rationally defend, like you say, that it is the torture and killing of animals.
So imagine if you were born in a culture where slavery was okay, and now a lot of people compare this to slavery, and I think that's a good thing to do.
I think it's a fair
It's a really fair comparison,
Probably
in my opinion, because the logic works, because we're talking in logic here rather than just what's so special about human, why can you arbitrarily decide that we are special? Do you think that maybe people found themselves in a society going, hey, I realise that slavery's wrong, but there's just something in me that's justifying it? Do you think maybe the culture itself, because you've not been brought up to think that this is wrong, you haven't been shown the extent of what happens? Like, most people won't look at what happens to animals.
I think it might be deeper than that. I think that rather than just a sort of socio-psychological nature to not be horrified by eating meat, it's clearly an evolutionary benefit. I mean, we have evolved to eat meat. Now, I don't want people to get me wrong, I'm not saying that makes it right, you know, I'm not that kind of naturalist. But you see what I'm saying? Like that would explain why perhaps I'm not immediately outraged by it. But it is, I think slavery is the fairest comparison. I mean, if you look at about the time just before slavery was going to be abolished, sort of 18th century, late 18th century, you look at some of the writings and some of the philosophy that was going on at the time, people knew it was wrong, but rather than discussing it openly and saying, what do we do about this, they kind of ignored it. You know, if you look at, for instance, the authorship of the Constitution of the US, a big part of that was slavery.
Yeah.
And it was a big part of the US, and when the Founding Fathers were designing the Constitution, in the back of their minds was, what do we do about this? For instance, when they were designing the House of Representatives, that's based on the population of the states, and they thought, well, do we include the slaves or not? But nobody was willing to talk about it like that. They didn't say, we're going to count the population by this many plus, you know, half the slaves. They said things like, the House of Representatives will be based on the proportion of the population of the states, including one proportion per person, and then 2/3 of everybody else. And by everybody else, they meant the slaves. But they couldn't bring themselves to say slavery or to say that was the kind of horror that was going on, because they knew it was wrong. And in the same way, people don't talk about it.
Do you think that's what's happening here? Because this conversation now, I don't know about you guys, I haven't seen many people who are in that rational sphere speak about this conversation. It's incredibly inconvenient.
And even when they do, they don't talk about killing animals, they talk about eating meat.
Yeah, and the other thing is that
it's
immediately I asked, what is your diet, how do you justify it? People seem to try and have conversations in which they don't really get to the philosophical underground of it, because they know that it's an inconvenient place to go.
This kind of leads me to the question though, like, is there a kind of moral difference in the systematic kind of like killing of animals in like a slaughterhouse or whatever? Is there a difference between that and just killing for survival like animals do, like our ancestors did? Yeah. So if society just fell apart right now, would it be okay to like go out and kill your own chicken and eat it?
Goes
like,
to the value
as opposed
thing, right?
to
I, for example, I love the taste of meat. I miss it, especially fish. But in this society where I have an abundance of food, I can't find any reason to do it. To be blunt, without feeling like a fucking arsehole.
Yeah.
Like I can't sleep at night because why does my appetite go above their suffering? But if I was in the wild, and I could, and I needed to eat, of course I would. But I was just going to say, it's similar to the prison system. It's like I would never say you take someone and you lock them behind bars.
Yeah.
However, there is a circumstance in which that's permissible.
Yeah.
It's the same with eating meat, and as you said, there's a big difference between hunting.
So what about the people that say, and this isn't my viewpoint, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate, but what about the people that say, oh well, they've already been killed, we might as well eat them?
So would that be, they're in the wild, they find a deer?
No, like now, like these animals have already been killed, they're already in the supermarket.
Oh.
Like,
well, for me, that's about supply and demand, really.
Yeah.
But that's a fair point. If you come across roadkill, how do you feel about eating that?
It's a different thing. So here's something that I've heard Matt Dilettanti. Obviously, I disagree with Matt Dilettanti on this. It's unfortunate. My public appearance with Matt is like, I disagree with him. I agree with him on just about everything. It's just there's a couple of issues I don't. But on veganism, I found him really, really, really disappointing, just to be honest. But I'm sure he maybe knows something I don't. He's a very, very smart man. But it's not the eating of meat that's wrong. So when people say it's wrong to eat meat, that's not really what they're saying. It's the act of saying, here's some money, I want you to go and abduct an animal, essentially torture it in the sense of deprive it of what it's evolved to need, rape it. I want you to take the child, veal for example, I want you to take the child, basically staple it to the floor so its muscles can't develop, and after several months of that agonizing experience, I want you to kill it so that I can have a 20-minute meal. Yeah. So it's not the eating that's the problem, it's the suffering that's caused with it. So if you see an animal roadkill, it's had a decent life, unfortunately it got hit by a car. If we accept that it had a natural life, I see nothing with eating, no problem at all with eating it. But then to be philosophically consistent, I see no problem with eating human.
Would you have a moral objection to eating a dead human?
No. Not if... It depends, because we have like these social rights where people say, well, why do we respect people's death wishes? Because they're not here to see whether or not it's okay. It's like, I would prefer to live in a society where that doesn't happen. If somebody said, listen, I don't care what happens to me, people can eat me if they want to try me, I've got no problem with that. It falls into this, maybe it's not practical, but philosophically, that's fine. There isn't, especially if the person says, listen, when I die, if I said to you guys, if I die before you and you fancy eating some meat, take some meat with me. What's wrong with that? We don't eat the brain, that's a bad thing, because it causes certain diseases. But do you see a philosophical problem with that at all?
I certainly don't. I mean, I don't think I could, it's weird, like, I don't think I could bring myself to emotionally do it. And the thing that I don't understand is, why is that the case, that even if you died of natural causes, I don't think I could emotionally bring myself to eat you. And yet when when an animal is actually, actively slaughtered, that's fine. I mean, surely that's...
Could it be that you know me? Like, I would argue...
There's an emotional connection there,
well, of course.
You love dogs, you've got Kyra, you love cats. Would you eat a cat, would you eat a dog?
Logically, what difference does it make if I knew you?
But
I could have known that.
This is the point. So you wouldn't eat dogs, right?
No, and that's the thing.
Would you eat cats? Would you eat dogs?
That's another reason, like, I won't eat lamb. I mean,
you won't
well,
eat,
actually, that's another thing. So, like, I tell myself I don't like the taste of lamb, but part of me is like, is it just that I don't want to eat lambs?
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And there are like other boundaries I'll put in. Like I'll be like, oh, well, I'll only eat chicken if it's free range or something like that. Or like,
Yeah.
I know it's free range, but I'd never like eat foie gras or something where they force feed them.
But you know what that sounds like? It sounds like saying, you know,
It sounds like I'm just trying to like.
I'll only
perform-
own slaves if I give
Yeah.
them like a nice bedroom.
Yeah,
you
I know.
This is why the slave argument's very good, because you can push.
Yeah.
People think that it's removed. Why? It's not removed. The logic is what needs to be.
But no, it's not just an analogy. I mean, it is slavery. You are enslaving these. You're breeding them for slaughter.
Yeah.
Now, some people, here's some of the arguments that I've heard. I
Yeah.
don't want to hear what you guys think. They think that the reason why humans should have all of the moral considerations that we have, all of the ethical laws, but that literally every other species should have basically none, is to do with a combination of being able to sign a social contract. Problem is, of course, we know humans that can't sign that social
Yeah.
contract. They're not mentally here because they are conscious, as if that's a thing, as if that matters. Can you think of a trait to name as to why we would grant rights to a human that's, say, mentally deficient? I don't know what the right word is now. I'm always getting the wrong word.
What about an understanding that that's what would happen to them?
Yes, so on the spectrum of sentience, I would say I would prefer to kill a grasshopper than punch a cow as hard as I could in the face.
Yeah.
And the reason,
Okay.
because of that, is the level of sentience that's involved.
But can sentience be quantified?
It can actually.
Yeah.
This is what's quite interesting. So when you experience pain, we can't get the ins and outs at the moment. Maybe in the future we can. But for one, a cortex is pretty damn important. There needs to be neurons that travel through the spine. So
Remember this stuff when we have the abortion debate as well. It's going to come into play there.
So here's one that people say. You cut an onion, what happens?
Well, it releases chemicals.
The reaction itself makes people think there's something going on there, but it's not, because there's no
Yeah.
neurons,
So
there's no...
This is what I was kind of thinking as you were talking about, the systematic killing of animals and stuff, and you were talking about, like slaughterhouses and this, and I was like, well, we technically have like this systematic way of harvesting fruit and veg, and then I was like thinking this, I was like, oh god, it sounds horrific, and I was like, no, but they can't feel, they can't think, they don't know what's happening to them, they don't have a consciousness.
So if I can just rewind it a second to quantifying sentience, because I think you were about to get onto something that I might have an objection to. For instance, let's say I don't know what you measure pain in. Is there a measurement for pain?
The measurement itself, I'm not equipped.
Doesn't matter. I mean, let's
I do know you need the cortex.
let's just call a unit of pain, a pain. Let's call it that. And so let's say that you can scan a grasshopper's brain, you can scan a cat's brain, you can scan a human's brain. And let's say you've got a cat and a cow, and you scan their brains, and you find out that the cow experiences more pain.
Yeah.
Right. So it has a higher level of pain reception. Okay. Now, is your argument then that the reason you'd rather kill the cat than punch the cow is because the cow is experiencing less pain?
In a nutshell, and in theory, yes.
Okay.
But in practice, it's more complicated than that.
So how about this though?
Okay.
You've got two people, one of whom is fairly weak, one of whom is fairly strong.
What do you mean by weak and strong?
In the sense that they are less. Let me find the best way to word this. You'll see what I'm saying immediately, so there might not be even a need to go around this analogy. But basically what I'm saying is that, yes, one person or one type of animal may experience less pain,
Yeah.
but what if they also have a lower propensity for pain? What if it's like, relative to their consciousness, relative to their experience, that less amount of pain feels and is experienced as the same?
Well, this is where the conversations should be being had,
But you've got a problem, because the only way that you can kind of the only way that you can differentiate something like a dog from a cow or something like that is really level of pain and sentience. But it's like if I were to punch two people and give them exactly the same amount of pain, if I were to punch someone who was weaker and had less of a tolerance for that pain, even if it's the same amount of pain, it would be worse to do that, right?
Yes.
And so, even if you've got a hierarchy of sentience, I don't think you can justify, killing those with less sentience or less propensity for pain, because to them the experience would be as severe, surely.
Did you agree with when I said about being able to kill the grasshopper, or choosing to kill the grasshopper rather than punching a cow in the face hard?
I don't know that I do. That's not me disagreeing. That's me saying I don't know because.
Yeah. Because there are right and wrong answers to these questions and a measuring of sentience, wouldn't you think, or not?
Well, I don't think so.
You don't think there would be
Firstly,
right and
because
wrong
I don't
answers?
think that there are right and wrong moral answers, full stop, but let's not...
But we don't even have to bring moral into it. If we're just
But
saying
if
about
you're saying
sentience.
with the objective of the lesser experience of pain, then I imagine so, but if you're judging it by experience, then...
No, not necessarily just by experience, but
that's what I'm suggesting. I'm saying, so what would you say to the proposition that rather than judging the morality of killing an animal based on how much pain it objectively is delivered to it, but rather measuring how much pain they subjectively experience. So if I deliver more pain to one animal, but it feels like less to them, am I more justified in hurting that animal?
I don't understand the difference between the two. Could you elaborate a bit more?
The difference between what? Between
You're saying that
the experience of pain and the deliverance of pain.
Well, two people get hit.
Yeah.
What happens is it sends a signal to the brain, goes through the spinal cord, goes into the cortex. You feel pain. Now, two different people are going to have, although it would be very similar, they're going to have a different level of pain. Yeah? And they subjectively experience that in so much as we define subjective as in it's a personal experience. What's the difference between, because you've got the pain itself that we can measure, and then they experience that pain. Their experience of that pain is directly linked to the number of pain receptors. So if you punch somebody that has no pain receptors, they just don't feel pain.
But can it be measured in that way? I mean, is it really as simple as the amount of pain receptors you have?
This is where we can go to the default position, right?
Just so you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If a cat has less pain receptors, then although it objectively experiences less pain, that pain makes up more of its being, if you know what I mean. It makes up more of the cat, even though there's less of it.
Oh, you mean like a percent-wise kind of thing?
Kind of, yeah. It's like if you break a cat's leg and you break a human's leg, you could say that the pain level is comparable because the cat's leg is smaller and has less pain receptors, but to the cat, it's the same proportion.
You mean my morphological size here? Like the size of a cow versus...
The size and the number of pain receptors, which I imagine are probably somewhat...
Yeah.
I don't know if they are, because if you take a kid, do you think a kid feels less pain when they're stabbed than an adult?
Ignore the size factor then, just think purely in terms of pain
I think you're talking about like the number of pain receptors per, say, like
Inch or
yeah,
something.
like per surface area or
I don't
something
know.
like that.
I want to get away from talking about it in terms of size. I want to talk about it in terms
like
of
proportion, if that makes sense. Of
yes,
the
proportion.
animal.
Proportion of the animal's sentience.
Yes. So I think I think you are right. I think with a grasshopper they have less pain receptors per whatever than...
But how do you know that?
We can test for it.
Yeah.
But what can you test for? You can test for the number of pain receptors, but you can't test for how that pain feels to the grasshopper.
No, you can't have that.
You don't know it. You don't know if that grasshopper experiences that pain as more severe than we would experience a nail breaking.
You can see the effect of the pain, so you can see if it releases any like chemicals or hormones in the brain. You can see if it makes the heartbeat faster. You can see if it makes someone sweat more. You can see if it increases the breathing. You can see the like physical effects of pain.
So, what you're getting into is a realm of ignorance. And I'm with you. But it's a good thing. It's like you're taking us to the limits
I know
of
what you
our
mean. No,
knowledge,
that's, you're right. Yeah.
And that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Now let's ask what the default position is. So before we even get into neurology, I experience life. I get a splinter from this table. I go, ow, that really hurts. I don't want to do that again. Rachel does it. I can infer from that Rachel's getting something like what I'm getting. Turns out that cats and dogs react the same way. So does every mammal, especially social mammals. It's seriously going on. You find that birds do the same, and then you find that insects, not quite so much. And then you look at fungus, doesn't seem to give a crap. This is just a level with pure observation. Is it definitive? Is it proof? No, we need to have those conversations. But the default position is not that you can hurt everything until you justify that you can't.
What about,
it's the other way around.
What about this? Let's say that you get a splinter in your hand and it hurts and you don't want to do it again. But then I say, if you don't give yourself a splinter, I'm going to die. You'd give yourself a splinter? Yes. I would hope.
I do this for you.
Okay, so what about if I were going to be in excruciating pain but not die if you didn't give yourself the splinter? Would you give yourself the splinter?
Yes.
What if I was going to have my leg broken? Would you give yourself the splinter?
I do.
What if I was going to have a really, really good night if you gave yourself the splinter? Would you give yourself the splinter?
Yeah, I'll give you a good night.
Well, thank you. What about like a really good meal?
Nah, you're starting to get to the area where I'm not.
So what I'm saying is like, it's not as simple as just like...
You're bringing in too many factors.
But what I'm saying...
You've brought in my moral autonomy.
The question...
Where do I personally want... What do I want to personally sacrifice for you? You can't ask that for a cow.
But you can see
that... You say for a cow, hey, can you die for me and also have a terrible life and we'll take your children away so that I can have a meal?
That's not what I'm doing. What I'm trying to get at is like, because of the fact that we can't get the cow's opinion, we have to make a moral decision as to whether we're justified in doing so. Like, would you kill a cow if it meant you're staying alive? Like you say, if you're in the wild, you'd do that, right? And so what I'm saying is, the question is not, can we kill animals for our convenience? It's what level of convenience needs to be attained in order to kill the cow. Like we've already decided that we can kill animans.
You can kill humans.
In order for, and just for the sake of convenience as well.
You would agree with humans as well, right?
I suppose I'd have to, yeah, like on a logical sense. But what I'm trying to say is that you have to get to a point where there's kind of a crossover of sentience coming down and down and down. So you've got sentience at the top with like humans, for instance, and if you're going to argue that these animals have less sentience, then you move that down and you move our convenience up. Where is the point at which the convenience at the level of tastes nice meets the sentience level that justifies it? And that's the kind of level of sentience that we would be able to justify killing the meat.
So if you were eating insects, that's where the level of question would be. But you're not, you're eating beef. So it's up here.
But how can you say that the insect is just where it lies? I mean, what about, what surely...
Mussels, you said mussels earlier, like they don't...
Yeah, so mussels, so far as my research has taken me, the way in which their development happens, they end up at a state when you eat them or when you pick them where they don't have a nervous system.
So I guess this brings me to like kind of other comparisons where I'd say like, okay, so if we imagine that like, let's say for the sake of argument, like all lives are basically kind of like equal and worth the same. And
so like natural rights kind of concept,
yeah. Can we justify killing one cow to feed 10 people?
I see.
Yeah. See, this is it's like, could you justify killing one person to save 10 people?
Yeah.
And if so, is a cow actually worth less than a human? If you could kill one person to save 10 people, could you kill one cow to save 5 people?
And what about comparisons to in the wild? So when a pride of lions get together and they take down a buffalo or a deer or a gazelle or something like that, they are systematically getting together to slaughter another animal for food. If they can do it, why can't we? Just for the sake of argument.
Okay, so first of all, cats, they are carnivores. They cannot live without meat. We can. So that puts us immediately in a situation where this becomes difficult. And just to caveat, some people assert that they must consume some meat. It's just the amino acid profile, whatever it might be, they have to get it from an animal source. Then that question becomes, okay, that doesn't justify you eating beef, just as much as it doesn't justify you eating human. What it does is it gets you to a position where you go,
okay,
crap, I've got to choose something, let me choose, let's say mussels, if you can get it from there, because the sentience.
Let me throw this at you then. Let's say we invent a dart of sorts that you shoot from a gun that can inject lions or some endangered species, let's say, to make it easier. So we have controlled numbers with the nutrients they need to survive. Would it then be immoral to leave them in the wild to go and kill their prey?
It's an interesting concept. I think
because if you're going to say no because we need to leave these lions to be free and to go and live out their lives and kill their prey, then you can say the exact same thing for humans. And if you're going to say no, then that's fine, you're being consistent, but can you really justify that?
I think the moral imperative there, assuming that well-being is what you're basing this on, which we don't even need to get to morality because we do, that would be the case, that you would necessarily have to do that. There would probably be arguments. Some arguments would say you'd want to remove predators entirely, but then others, which are very fair arguments, is that you need an equilibrium of the state of things. So one of the best things you can do to get rid of a influx of enormous amount of rabbits is introduce foxes. Now, that's a different.
That is different because we don't have a cow problem.
Yeah, and it's and no, we don't at all. In fact, the cow problem we have at the moment is the problem that we have with climate change in general.
Okay, so can I give you another analogy so as not to so as not to waste that line of thought? Take a zoo. Now, I think of all of us here, the person that cares most about animals, from what I've seen, is Rachel. Rachel, how would you feel if there was a zoo that was feeding its animals, and you know zoos keep their animals very well, they feed them, they make them healthy. Let's say that the zoo decided, we've just found a nutrient mix or a pill that we can give to all of our animals. They'll be slightly less healthy. They won't be as happy, they won't be as strong, but they'll live and they'll be fine, they just won't be as healthy. Would you be in favour of doing that?
No.
So
for me,
why justify that for humans? So because that's effectively what we're saying. We're saying yes, we can survive without meat. It won't be quite as convenient, won't be quite as strong and quite as happy, but we can get by without it, and so we should. Why wouldn't you say the same thing for a zoo? What would you say, Stephen?
I'd apply it to slavery. I'd be happier if I didn't have to do all my chores.
I know that morally, kind of like overall, it's not right to, systematically slaughter animals, and I want to live up to that as much as possible. However, I also have this mindset that I have this one life, and I want to live it to my happiest and to my healthiest and to the most convenient. And if that means occasionally eating meat, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of my moral high ground, if you want to put it that way, for a little bit of happiness.
Would you do the same thing for a human?
Would you do it for slavery? Logically, it's like,
tough.
Listen, I live once, I want the convenience of
and if that means
life.
owning a slave or two, then so be it.
I know it's really tough, but I think
Sometimes
the difference is the emotional kind of attachment I have to the things that I'm kind of eating or whatever.
Is it not better to base a worldview on logic and reason rather than emotion?
Because if you base it on emotion,
I think it might be better, but it's not going to happen. Realistically,
but it has. It's happened with slavery. It's a logical.
That's true. You could say the same thing. It's like, look, slavery was incredibly.
It was ingrained in the actual.
It was ingrained.
Economy.
It was necessary to the economy of the South.
I think
there's no way they'll ever get rid of slaves, but they did it.
Yeah, I know.
And
part of it was because we have this emotional connection with other humans and a need to want to protect other humans,
Fair
right?
point.
I don't actually buy that this is the way it works. The way I see this is something that I've heard from Marx, and I think he was probably right, is that the economy is what drives our morals or our moral perspectives. So people like to think that we saw slaves and we realised this is really, really wrong, let's get rid of it, despite the fact that it's economically the more convenient and the better situation to be in. They took a sacrifice, but now they're better because we have capitalism. That's not the way it worked. Some people started employing people. They realised that they could get people that were more skilled, that would work harder, and it outcompeted feudalism. And so all of a sudden, as the economy drives that way, people started saying, yeah, this is wrong, and started getting behind the moral issues. I think the same is going to be with meat. The second that in vitro meat happens, where people can grow in the lab meat, where you can go, listen, do you want a burger where we've done this to a chicken, or do you want a burger where we grew this slab of chicken breast back in wherever?
I would switch in an instant.
But the thing is, that's when I think people all of a sudden go, oh, yeah, we made a moral decision. To those people in the future, no, you didn't.
It's tough because
yeah,
my decision to eat meat isn't a moral decision. I'm not gonna for all I've tried to sort of say these excuses and stuff. I eat meat because I enjoy it, and it's not a moral decision.
But should it be a moral decision?
Well, that's the thing. I think in an ideal world, in a rational, logical world, it would be a moral decision, but...
Does it not seem hypocritical to have logic and reason applied in the realms of humans for, slavery, but to just emotionally decide that it's not the case for beings that experience pain similar to us?
No, I think it can be hypocritical, and I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying
because this is actually something I worried about.
It's a kind of imperfection that I'm willing to embrace and say it's something that I currently struggle with. It's something that I currently don't necessarily like about myself, but it's something that, this is the position I'm in, and it's something I'm working on.
It's the contradiction at the heart of the nation. I think Benjamin Franklin called slavery, talking about America. It's the contradiction. It's the contradiction at the heart of our conscience at the moment. I mean, it really is.
And I think if I was sat here saying oh, I'll never change and I'll never stop eating meat, and this is whatever, I think that would be one thing.
Well, a lot of people would say you're paying lip service.
What do you mean?
It means that you're just saying these things, and your actions show that there's no
difference.
Can I get you right? Are you saying that you recognise that eating meat is immoral, but you're doing it anyway? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, because for me...
So would you call yourself a moral person? Or would you say I'm an immoral person?
I wouldn't say I'm either immoral or moral. I'm just a person,
Okay.
and some of my actions are immoral, and some of my actions are moral.
And would you see this as an immoral action?
I think it's a grey area, but it's probably slightly closer to immoral than moral. And I think that's why I'm working on things. That's why, like, I'm trying to switch all my makeup brands to, like, the makeup that I use, I'm trying to switch to vegan brands.
Well, to take
And
the
stuff like that for a
conversation
start,
in a
and
slightly more
yeah.
positive angle, as you're just saying, some movements I'm very adamant are better than none at all. So making some kind of progress towards, hey, I'm starting to buy makeups that don't,
Yeah.
you know, basically make tons of rabbits go blind just so that
Yeah.
I can use it. That's a difference between you doing that and not doing it.
Yeah.
So, for example, a lot
But
of people
I
rightfully...
admit it's still a selfish decision of mine to say, you know what, I don't want to not enjoy food, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm in the
yeah.
same boat as you in some sense,
that?
because I eat cheese and I consume eggs. So this puts me in a situation where I've said, okay, I'm not okay with these immoral acts, but I will, for some reason, do these.
Yeah.
And I'm making a progress where I'm starting to buy my milk and eggs from a local farm, which I see, and when I get my own property, I might even own a cow if I can. I certainly will own chickens. So some progress is better than none, which unfortunately I've seen some in the vegan community not see that to be the case. But it's hard not to bring this back to slavery, in the sense that
Every time there's always an analogy to be made.
it just keeps coming back.
So do you think that there's any, can you envision a situation in which slavery would be justified, Stephen?
In which slavery might be justified?
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question I'm not prepared for.
That's how I roll.
Yeah, well, slavery kind of falls down into that concept of natural rights. I don't believe in natural rights, we're not born with rights, but it falls into that natural social contract of saying...
Sorry, I have a question. Do we mostly have a problem with slavery because in the past, especially in America, it was based on race, and we didn't feel like you should segregate someone based on race? Like,
I think
that there are separate issues. It's like,
Yeah.
firstly, the rule is ownership of human beings is always wrong.
yeah.
Secondly, is an issue of segregation. It just so happens that the
But
two
where,
overlap.
where do we draw the line then with like ownership of humans? Like, because up until a certain point,
Well,
you could argue that
It's like an employer owns you.
Yeah,
But they don't.
or well, okay, because money, I guess.
And
if anyone owns you, the
because you
government
can
owns
leave.
you know.
But I was also going to say with like young children and parents, like they have this like, you know, they have a duty of care over them, but to some extent,
Well, you can
the
remember that when
child-
we come to abortion.
to some extent, like the child doesn't have autonomy, and yet somehow that's okay.
Yeah, it's to do with their level of mental capacity, right?
So what if there are adults who don't have that level of
So you'd
mental
say
capacity?
maybe take the people with low IQ and take away their freedom.
Oh no, I don't think we should. I'm
No,
just
but,
saying.
but if that's the argument you're making, then you could say that because the animals have
Yeah, no,
animals have the lower IQ and have less
no, I'm
cognitive
just making
ability.
a argument. I'm not saying it's my argument.
Sorry.
It doesn't need to be.
That's what I mean.
I think it's safe to say that by anybody watching this conversation who thinks that by bringing up a line of discussion we necessarily believe in it is wrong to do so. So I think it's an interesting area of discussion. The reason I asked, is there any reason to justify slavery, is because the analogy works so well. If you can find a point at which that would be okay, then perhaps to a lesser degree, you could find a way to justify eating meat in some situations, and it wouldn't necessarily need to be as severe. So
Would you say putting someone in prison is a form of slavery? You take away their liberal rights, you throw them in a box, and you say, listen, you're in there for now.
But at least they get paid for their
So,
work.
of course I'm for slavery under certain circumstances if it's defined that way.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. What's your limit? Fair point. I phrased the question badly. What's the limit? I mean, what is the least a person could do, or what is the least severe situation you could imagine in which slavery would be justified?
Slavery being justified. Well, actually, now I'm thinking about it, I see prison as a form of slavery especially when
It
you
absolutely
use
is,
them.
now that I think about it.
So yeah, I think there's justification over levels.
Okay, so
in that realm.
we put people in prison. I know you think this. I don't know about you, Rachel, because I don't know your views on free will. But we put people in prison not because they deserve it, but because we're deterring, or because it serves a utilitarian purpose. Is there an argument to be made that if we can restrict the liberty of humans to serve some utilitarian purpose of pleasure and smoothly running society, that we can restrict the liberty of animals to for the sake of utilitarian pleasure and smooth ordering of society and health?
Well, we do. you know.
But should we be? That's what I'm saying. Like is that justified?
Yeah.
Because
So,
if you're gonna
if lions are coming in and starting to wreak havoc, there's absolutely justification to get them away, and should the circumstance call for it, you kill them.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that there
are circumstances where pretty much anything is justifiable.
So how severe would your health have to be in order to justify eating meat?
So let's say that you have a severe condition where you must get amino acids from certain animals, right? There's going to be an argument to say this person why shouldn't this person be able to get this necessary resources for them? And you could calculate it. You go, in order for this person to live 80 years, they're going to have to consume, let's say, I don't know, 20,000 chickens or whatever it might be. You could probably figure out a number of what they might have to get killed. You can level those and you go, this is a problem. But luckily you might not even get to that situation, because if they need a certain nutrient, you find out where that nutrient is found in the animal kingdom, and you find out the most, I say humane, although I don't like that word, you find out the most humane method of ascertaining it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you find that you can get it from mussels is what they can justify. The problem is that you meet people that say, I have a problem where I do need to eat meat, and then eat a burger that's halal, that they just paid for, which is probably imported from some European country where there is no laws, and they feel justified in saying, I am actually justified for this. And it's like, you really are not. Like, I don't get that.
But do you think a person should be made to eat food they don't enjoy?
You don't have to eat food you enjoy, but if you was to say, listen, I'm really sorry, but I just don't like any food other than meat, tough. That's the same as saying, because you're putting your appetite up against something else is suffering. It's the same as someone going, listen, I've tried all the jobs, I don't like them, so I just want a slave. It's like, tough, you can't have that. That's not. Would you think I'm unfair with that at all, or with that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like levels to it. So I think you're right to some extent. So like, if a person was just like, no, I just need meat, like that is kind of too far. But
it's okay to just have a slave on the weekends.
I don't know. That's the thing. Well, no, I don't think that. But I think if a person was like, you know, I don't want to do these jobs, it's okay to hire a cleaner in your house or something like that. That's kind of the comparison I make. Like, instead of getting a slave, you'd hire a cleaner or something.
The thing about the hiring a cleaner
it's kind of levels.
is they choose for it, right? Because they get something in return.
It's a two-way contract.
Where's the reciprocal relationship of saying, listen, can I just have your chest? I want to eat it. It's.
Let me ask you guys another question that takes us in another direction. Imagine a situation in which people did eat meat, but it were only the case, for instance, that the meat industry was one where people went into the wild and they killed animals, or they took animals who had died naturally, or they killed animals who they knew somehow scientifically were about to die in the next hour, let's say, and they killed them with an instant shot to the head.
Okay.
And they bred animals, but they bred them into the wild to then a few years later go back and kill an hour before they were going to die anyway, and probably less painfully. Would you have a problem with that meat industry?
There's a couple of components to what you were saying there. So, for example, the breeding for that purpose, I see problems in that.
Why?
What would you do if someone bred you for that purpose? They said, listen, you're just a different type of human.
But you don't know that. As far as you're concerned,
so the animal
your
wouldn't know that.
life is exactly the same.
Would you be okay having a chance with you being one of those humans that were born into an area where about an hour before you die, they're going to come in and bolt you in the head?
How do you know that you're not?
This is my point. Like, would you be okay in a world?
I don't think it would matter.
But you must be, because you wouldn't know either way.
I see. So you're saying that you wouldn't have the knowledge.
It's like somebody might be out to shoot you. There might be somebody who is going to shoot you in the head 1 hour before you die. You have no way of knowing. It's not going to affect your quality of life. It's not going to affect anything about your life. And in fact, had that not been the case...
Well, robbing the last hour from someone can sometimes mean a big difference, but I do get.
But had that not been the case, you wouldn't have been born. Would you rather?
I don't. This whole you would not be born. Like the cows wouldn't be alive today.
No, I agree. I agree. That's a bad argument in general. But in this specific case, let's say a situation in which you would not have been born if it were not the case that someone were planning to shoot you an hour before you were born? Would you rather be born or not be born in that situation? Because I'd rather be born.
I would rather be born, and honestly, it doesn't matter to me what happens with my body after I die, because I'm gone.
So what's the problem with that meat industry?
This is largely getting back to two things that we've said. The first being, is it wrong to eat humans? Which I've said no.
And I say no too.
Exactly, so it's the same thing. And the
Okay.
second being, is it wrong to eat animals in the wild that have lived a lovely life,
But it's more
a
than
natural
that.
life?
It's more than that, because we're
It's
breeding
because-
them for the purpose
Yeah,
of
we're keeping them
slaughter.
in those. Well, to a large extent, we're kind of doing that anyway. We preserve national parks. That's, in effect, you are breeding animals, but indirectly you're letting them do their thing. And then when one gets hit by a car, you just pick it up and you eat it.
Have you got a
similar.
problem with that?
No, I don't have a problem. It's the eating of meat I have no problem with.
But what about the situation?
The meat industry does not reflect anything like the scenario you came up with, and maybe
No, it doesn't. But if it did, would you have a problem with it?
much less of a problem.
But,
So
why would you have any problem with that? What's the moral problem with that?
What's the difference between these two scenarios? A calf is born by cows.
Yeah.
It's a social being. It grows up with that social environment.
Yes.
It moves with the cows. It lives to its ripe old age of whatever that might be. And just as it's in pain and it's about to die, someone bolts it in the head and takes home to eat it. And then in another scenario, a calf is born and it's restricted access to its family, is a social being again. It's kept in a small confined place. It's not fed the food it's meant to eat because it's cheaper to feed it corn. It doesn't develop psychologically, it doesn't develop physically. And then after 1/3, a maximum of the age of what the other one's going to have, it's killed in normally a halal process unless you go out your way, which is horrific. That's hung upside down, so you die choking on your own blood. And even if you take that away and you just go for the bolt, the difference between those two.
Of course, I know, I agree. The second is a moral abomination, but I'm saying.
But that's the difference. This is much more okay.
No, but here's the thing. I'm
than
not just
the
saying.
former.
I'm not just saying why is it more okay. I'm saying you're saying it's much more okay. You're not saying it is okay.
No, it's not okay.
So what's the problem with it?
Because you don't need it. It's just there is a gradient to be recognised.
Why is it a problem? You can't just say because you don't need something, it makes it immoral to do it.
No.
What's the problem with that meat industry?
It's immoral to cause suffering for no good reason.
But you're not causing suffering. You're causing life.
If
You're killing it in the end, but you've also given life.
Okay.
That's identical to how it would have been had it been born naturally.
So
what's the problem?
So someone bringing in a child into this world, they somehow owe them something for bringing in the life. Is this?
That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, would you have a problem? Like you say, imagine the life. What's the difference between the life of a cow under my patented meat industry,
Right.
and the life of a cow in the wild? The only difference is the intent of the people that the cow knows nothing of. As far as the cow is concerned, and remember, the only reason we have a moral problem with killing a cow is because of its conscience. If its conscience is exactly the same, because it has no knowledge of what's going on in the exterior world, what is the problem?
So isn't it the pain that we're concerned about?
Well, perhaps
And
it
the
is.
suffering,
So there's no
which
difference. In
is-
fact, breeding a cow and knowing that you're going to kill it by a shot to the head rather than letting it be slaughtered by another animal or starved to death in the wild, surely that actually reduces the pain.
You could argue that it's a reduction.
So
of
what I'm
thingy.
saying is I completely agree that the meat industry as it is much worse than that hypothetical meat industry. But I wouldn't just say that hypothetical meat industry is better. I'd say it's fine. I wouldn't say it's not as bad. I'd say it's not bad.
Oh, so you would say that system that you've just come up with, there is no moral problems at all.
I can't see. Well, what I'm asking you to do is explain, just based on your language, the fact that you said that's not as bad implies that you still think there's something bad about it. I'm asking you to explain what it is that's bad.
Okay, the emphasis is on the fact that you said that an hour before its death,
Yep.
some form of suffering.
Instant death.
Yes.
No pain,
I
just
see.
instant death.
The way in which I interpreted it was that you were saying that there was some form of pain at the end, and my point was that if there's just a tiny amount of pain, that's obviously better than the industry we have now. That's more justifiable than that. But if you're saying no pain at all, I may want to amend your theoretical system. But if we was to have that situation where there's no pain at all, for the same reason I see no problem with eating a human, I see no problem with eating anything else.
So let's say that there is a little bit of pain. Would you say that
I will just say, if you have chimps, and it turns out that when a chimp dies, the other organisms will suffer if you take away the chimp to eat it. That is a component to be considered as well. Because I was just thinking.
Yes, but that's why I say the cow was going to die anyway, an hour later.
I know, but like, if it so happens that cows, because of their social aspect, do mourn in some way, and they do actually stay around the bodies, taking that body away will cause some suffering. It's almost none.
But the fact that this is the thing I was going to say about suffering. You might say that the suffering is still there, but like you've just said, the suffering is minuscule. Yeah. But the pleasure that we get from eating meat is minuscule. But does the pleasure that we get from eating meat outweigh the minuscule pain at the end of that cow's life?
Well, it goes back to the question at the beginning from Peter Singer. Does my appetite override your suffering?
No, well, that's the thing. In the general sense, if you're talking about the meat industry as it is at the moment, then absolutely not. Of course our appetite does not override that. But what I'm saying is, in this situation, where there is still a little bit of suffering, which you've said is a problem, is it really a problem if in that instance, because the suffering is so little, our appetite really does outweigh that suffering?
I think you may, again, depending on how you define the construct, you may find a place where maybe something of some sort could be justified. And certainly if there is no, you make it so the animals are born, they live lovely natural life, they enjoy themselves, it's just when they die you take the body. That's, if you get as close to that as possible. Again, it's not the eating of meat that vegans or I have a problem with. It's the paying people to do atrocious acts that you would probably never do yourself.
Yes.
Can I ask a slightly unrelated, well, it is kind of related, but it goes back to something you said right in the beginning about how certain like vegans and stuff won't eat honey.
Yes.
And this has kind of like been like sort of bouncing around my mind a little bit. And that, like, how does us eating honey like harm bees? Like, do you eat honey? Like, I don't eat honey, but it's more of a taste preference.
I do eat honey, but I only on small occasions. Normally when it's in a bar or something, I go my way.
Eating honey?
So there's several problems of eating honey.
Wouldn't they make it anyway?
Well, they spend a long time to create a little bit of honey, and then we go in and we take it away and we replace it with sugar, which isn't what they need. It's not what they've worked for.
So do they need honey to survive?
Not necessarily. You can make them live with, I think you can make them live, I should say, with substitutes.
Okay.
The real problem with bees is that there's a lot of links between wildlife in general, especially the bottom layer of the food chain, as it were, and bees, with plants and pollination.
Okay.
If you mess bees up, you mess that bottom layer up, that will echo throughout the entire thing. So there's that's the element that's...
but some people, like, breed bees especially for their honey. Like, is that wrong? Is that, like, slavery?
Well, again, could you say some people breed humans especially for slavery?
But hold on.
Well,
like,
I don't know.
Let me
sorry.
So it's okay, I don't know.
Let me drop something in here. You say that bees are integral to the well-being of many other animals, and you say that the reason that it could be seen as immoral to take away honey from bees and replace it with sugar is because though sugar helps them to survive, it keeps them healthy, it's not really the best for their nature. Okay, so surely the exact same argument could be used against veganism in humans, right? Because if the reason you don't want to take honey from bees is because although you're giving them sugar, that's not really what they need, and they're not going to be as happy and healthy. You could say, well, we could take away meat from humans and give them a substitute, but that's not quite what they need. But they can still get by. And also the fact that the rest of the animal kingdom relies heavily on humans in many ways. So why does that argument apply to bees but not to humans?
The idea that the animal kingdom relies on us is something I would have deep concern with. I don't think it does. Not anywhere near what bees do for the entire environment. But the other factor would be...
Okay, so take the other argument.
Yeah, I would not be the best to answer this question. I actually don't know the ins and outs of why vegans think it's wrong to eat honey.
I suppose
I was just given the reasons that I have because I'm someone that eats it, so I'm obviously not as convinced as I perhaps should be.
But if that was the reason that you say you avoid eating honey, what would be your response to that?
I think what this all comes down to is there justification given certain circumstances? And I agree there is. It's just a matter of being able to evaluate those circumstances and find where it is the case. Just as there's some circumstances where you can put a man in prison, you can rob them of their freedom and you can make them work for free. So slavery, there's a case for slavery. There is cases for eating animals It's just when you get the extremes, the extreme of what we do now, where like the chicken you just bought from Weatherspoons from a restaurant, very likely is halal and it came from a European country because it's a business. It's trying to make money. It does cheap, good food, and that's the way in which that works. That's the equivalent of taking someone who's done nothing wrong and enslaving them. Whereas when you go to the extent of, okay, here's a justification where you can put someone behind prison because he's raped or killed or whatever it might be, that would be more akin to the examples that you've been giving where there's some form of justification for it.
Would you have a problem with throwing a single innocent man in jail who'd done nothing wrong if it meant that nobody would ever have the pain of breaking a bone ever again?
Only if he was really annoying.
So would you throw Stephen behind bars?
Yeah.
But would you do it?
So
Would you throw an innocent person behind bars if it meant that a lesser pain was avoided but for everybody?
I don't think so, because I feel like with some rare exceptions, like broken bones don't alter your life that much in the long run.
But
you
it's
know, like
everybody. Like this
yeah, that's the thing.
this pain disappears, and it's a lesser pain, but the pain is universal, and it's gone.
What you're making is a consequentialist argument, right? It's essentially what was made with the Romans. It was like we would get much more suffering by throwing one Christian in to fight a lion. It's similar to that. It's like one person suffers so that everyone
What I'm
has
trying
a
to
better life.
do is I'm trying to show that for many people, and it might not be the case for you. I don't think I would, for instance. I don't think you could give me any number of any amount of pain that could justify throwing an innocent person in jail. However, for those who would justify that, and I think even though I disagree with that, I can see why you might think that.
I do. I was once convinced by consequentialism in general, because that is what that argument falls down into. The problem is that consequentialism doesn't take account for what is in moral philosophy conceived as natural rights. So the starting point is that you have liberty to a certain extent, period. It doesn't matter about the consequences. That's how that starts. So this becomes more of a moral question in the philosophical realm of moral philosophy.
I'm trying to demonstrate that there's perhaps a situation under which it's not necessarily the type of pain or pleasure. So although you might justify killing an animal, for instance, for a pleasure that is stronger than appetite. Instead of, and that's the argument that most people will go down. For instance, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, rather than going down that route, let's improve the quantity. So let's say that yes, we have appetite is the pleasure of appetite is outweighed by the pain of animal suffering, but is the pleasure of 2 people's appetite still outweighed? What about 3 people's appetite? What about 10? What about 100? Like, would you kill one cow if it meant every single person in the world was able to experience a nice meal?
I would kill one human. If you could do that. What I'm saying.
Would you kill an innocent human?
Right.
If it meant that everybody else could have one really nice meal?
I personally wouldn't, because
okay, would you kill a cow? You kill one cow, and every single person in the world that night gets to have a fantastic meal that tastes amazing.
No, I wouldn't.
What about a chicken?
No.
What about a grasshopper?
You're trying to see where the level is, I guess.
I'm always trying to see where the level is, and I'm trying to say, why is the grasshopper different? What is the difference? And if the difference is a level of sentience, then just increase the number of people, and the sentience is balanced out.
I see. So you're going from that, yeah.
I have a question, and that is, do the intentions matter, like, rather than just the action? So, like, if you systematically kill 10 cows for fun, is that worse than systematically killing 10 cows to eat?
That is basically for fun as well. I mean, it's kind of the same thing.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
But because there's like, say there's like no other food.
But
like,
yeah.
And then the other option, you just throw the cows away.
Yeah.
You know. So do the intentions matter?
Yeah.
So if someone does an immoral act but kind of with good intentions, is that still better than someone who is being immoral and wanting to be immoral, if that makes sense?
My answer to always to this question is kind of like consequentialism versus like deontology. It's like, is an act good because of the intention? Is an act good because of the outcome? For me, I basically say, if you're talking about morality, good and evil and oughts and ought nots, then the moral act is all to do with intention. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the moral act is always the most desirable, you know?
Yeah.
So I'd say that perhaps if your intention is better, then you're a more moral person. But if it leads to if I know it's going to lead to a poorer outcome, then I would say, well, let's not be moral then.
Like, do you know the difference between murder and manslaughter?
Isn't one like when you intend to kill someone and then the others just went?
So the law recognises that there's a difference between deliberately trying to kill someone and accidentally killing someone. So for me, if someone wrongs me in any way, I always look at the intent. I don't really care about the action itself. I want to know, did they mean for that? And if they did, that's where.
And you can only make that moral judgment in hindsight, and you shouldn't really make moral judgments in hindsight, because if you know what the consequence is going to be from the beginning, then the intent would change.
Of course it would.
Okay, but let's say someone does something purposefully immoral and it has a positive outcome, like a net positive outcome. Like, could you still be mad at them for it? Like, let's talk about something.
I think so.
Yeah, let's talk about something like inconsequential, like say YouTube. Say someone makes like a really mean video about you and they say all these horrible things and like, oh Steve, your hair sucks. And they're like, me. But you get a 50,000 sub boost overnight. Can you still be mad at them for making that video?
Yes, I would say yes. I would say that person still did something immoral, even though they might have been right, and even though...
For exactly what you were focused on, right? It's the intent.
Yeah.
Because they didn't intend for that, they intended to do the latter.
Yeah.
So I got two quotes from two famous people I want to push past you. You've got Leonardo da Vinci, who said, "The time will come when men such as I will look upon the murder of animals as they now look upon the murder of men."
Couldn't agree more.
Which was echoed by Richard Dawkins, who said, "In 100 or 200 years, we may look back on the way we treated animals today as someone looks back at the way our forefathers treated slaves." Seems that we seem to agree on that fact.
I do agree, yeah.
So
I think ideally I'd like to get to a place in my life where I'm not consuming animal or animal products. Like, I don't think, what's the word, like, not convenience, but I don't think, what's the word?
Well, perhaps it is convenience. I mean, when it comes down to it, it really is convenient.
It's far more convenient for me to eat cheese.
Practically, that's the word I'm trying to use. I don't think practically it's a place I can get to right now, but it is somewhere that I'd like to get to. And I think, I don't know.
It is this interesting realm of cognitive dissonance, and I'm really pleased to have had this conversation with you both, because a lot of people don't touch it, and I think it's for what you were pointing on earlier on. It's actually an inconvenient topic to talk about. It's an inconvenient truth. And I don't know how everyone will react. They might find me to be a vegan nutjob who's not even vegan. That would be one hell of a title.
And me and Alex are going to be like these massive hypocrites. And,
yes. Well, no, this thing...
It's going to be like exposed.
I don't think that I can call myself a moral person until I stop eating meat.
It's a good observation.
I don't think I can do it.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't think I'll ever claim to be a moral person, because I don't think many people can. Because I think everyone is going to act selfishly at times, and it's just something we have to work on.
Here's a component that I do want to add in. It doesn't matter how far you go, you can't actually escape this madness. So if you take someone who's a vegan who basically, with a few exceptions, if you just live in the forest on your own, you go and buy peppers for dinner with some rice. In order to have those peppers, there's been preservatives that have killed insects. There's been, you can't escape this horrible...
I think you can escape the madness.
What if you don't buy fair trade products and you have farmers being screwed over and stuff like that?
I think you can escape the madness once you get to the point where one outweighs the other. So if we can say that the pain of an insect is less, like let's say for instance, I mean you can imagine a straight line and you've got pleasure going upwards and pain going downwards by a set amount. If the pain is equal to -2 and the pleasure is equal to +3, then you could perhaps justify.
The only problem I have with that is that is consequentialism.
Yes.
And the reason we don't apply it to humans, like killing one person for the pleasure of many, is because we've got to this position where we have a starting plane where that's not allowed, which we call natural rights, or it's called other things in other areas. The question for me is whether or not there should just be a natural plane for everything that has sentience. Should rights be given according to sentience? It's basically the question.
But then you do have the problem of when are you going to escape that madness?
I don't think you can, and that's okay.
Is it okay though?
If you do the best you can with the environment you have, and you necessarily can't do better.
I don't know, because you always can do better. You always can do better. You could starve yourself.
What, to kill yourself?
You could starve yourself to death, yeah.
Yeah, so it's all about finding an equilibrium with.
But that's the thing. But the fact that you have to draw that line means that you can't just have a base rule.
So you can't. So what you're saying?
If you have a base rule,
no one could be morally perfect.
No.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
But there is people that have moral virtue because they go to, and I would say vegans, a lot of them really are up there.
But now, don't you sound exactly like Matt Dillahunty's argument, the one that you had the problem with?
Well, with Matt Dillahunty, he has.
It's a moral virtue. It's not a moral necessity.
The way he uses moral necessity and moral virtue is different. I'm just calling them virtuous.
What do you mean by moral virtue?
I'm just saying that they are as moral as they can be.
Oh, okay.
Whereas Matt, I don't want to speak it.
Yeah, I'd hate to mischaracterize.
I don't want to mischaracterize Matt. Maybe I'll have a conversation with him and he can flesh out to me what his views are. But
no pun intended.
Yeah, no, pun actually was not intended. So yeah, that's that's good stuff. But in fact, on that note, I won't speak for him. I don't want to do as much.
Yes, yeah, that's fair enough.
I want to conclude with 2 quotes before sending you off to these 2 wonderful channels. We're going to be speaking about nihilism again with Alex. Will be just as interesting as this conversation, I am sure. And abortion with Rachel. So yeah, we're going for all the hard topics, and I think we're going to need a drink after these 3 conversations.
Yeah, tune in for Abortion with Rachel.
Abortion with Rachel.
That sounds like a great show.
And nothing fucking matters with Alex.
Yes. And let's all kill ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
The quotes I want to finish with is one from Johnny Depp. If you don't like seeing pictures of violence towards animals being posted, you need to help stop the violence, not the pictures. And the second is from Sam Harris, and it's a slightly modified one by myself. Consider it. Every sentient entity you have ever met, every sentient entity will suffer the loss of his friends and family. All are going to lose everything they love in this world. Why would one want to be anything but kind to them in the meantime?